Well, a very good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very, very warm welcome to today's BA Community webinar. Now, I suspect as BAs or change practitioners, all of us think about injecting the voice of the customer into what we do. And we think that we're taking a customer-centric approach to our analysis and definition and design work. But it's worth taking some time to reflect on what we actually mean by that. So I'm really pleased to say that today we're joined by Chris Burns. And Chris is going to talk to us about that sort of user centricity, that user centric approach. So before we kick off, just a little bit about Chris. Chris has had a range of job titles over the past 12 years, but all really focus on the design, delivery, improvement of digital products and services. But one thing that really stuck out when I was reading about Chris is, your career as a product manager at the English Institute of Sport, which just sounds like such a fantastic experience. So Chris is going to talk to us about, the topic is we're all user-centered, aren't we? So a fantastic topic. And there's going to be a presentation from Chris and then a Q&A, a conversational Q&A afterwards. Now, just before we get started, you can type your questions and answers as we go along. So we will take Q&A at the end. However, you can, you can type them in as you go along as they occur to you. Also, if you've been on the previous couple of webinars, you'll know that we've been trying a bit of an experiment. So what we've been doing recently is setting up a Google Jamboard. And you should have just received a little link in the chat to a Jamboard. And what that is, I'll just show you very quickly. That's a sort of interactive like thinking space. So as we're going through the webinar, if there are things that interest you, you can slap them on the Jamboard, and then we've got a sort of summary of all the themes and ideas towards the end of the session. So we'll bring that back sort of in the middle of the session and see what ideas are particularly resonating with you as well. So, with a presentation entitled "We're All User-Centered, Aren't We?" Chris, over to you.
Yep, thanks very much for the intro there, Adrian. Great to be with you all. So yeah, I've been thinking about this for a little while now, about user-centered design and how a lot of us take that for granted. So brief history about me. So as Adrian said, I've worked in a number of different job titles, mainly in the digital arena. But for about 3 years, a little while ago, I worked for Bury Football Club as a performance analyst and head of scouting and performance, which was really interesting. And I did that alongside being a business analyst at a law firm. So I was quite busy at the time. But that really kind of helped me get a firm grounding of elite sport, even though it wasn't a Premier League club, or it was a lower league team. But it was still professional football, which was taken very seriously by both the players, coaching staff, and the fans as well. So real great grounding. So when I was offered the opportunity to work at the English Institute of Sport, it was a great opportunity for me to take that up, and I had that real knowledge of kind of the sport side of things, and also focusing on digital development and products and services. So being user-centered, I mean, there's a number of different ways we could frame this, and for me, it's being user-centered is about solving real problems for people, for humans. I think a lot of time and effort has gone into doing a lot of research and good problem solving. The likes of Uber and sort of taxis out via a digital medium and things like that. And I think that is a really kind of user-centered way of doing things, and I think a good taxi driver is user-centered, because what they're doing is they're using their own knowledge, their own local knowledge, their own their experience, their expertise, and they're providing a service to us. I think in digital development, what we sometimes find is that if we're trying to be user-centered, we actually turn into being user-led, and we're asking the questions to the customers, to the clients, to the people that we're building for, but doesn't necessarily we don't necessarily build a brilliant product because we're just listening to their thoughts and we're listening to their ideas all the time. We're just doing everything that they want. And being user-centered for me is about combining the two things. It's about listening to the voice of the customer, but also then really understanding and using your own expertise to craft something that's usable and that's helped solve the problem and you know enables the task that the people are trying to do. You know, a user-led taxi driver might be someone who asks where you're going and then asks what route you want to take. It's okay if you're on a flat fee, but you're not really the expert at that. You don't necessarily know what the local traffic is if they've been driving around all day and you're just coming home from work. Another example of being user-centered, and this was something that really hit me last year. One of my friend's young sons, he went to school for the first time in reception, and he came home and he had this little name badge on his thing. And I thought, oh, it's cute. So I just mentioned that and asked him the question, kind of, you know, did everyone have one of those? That looks really nice. And he kind of looked back at me a little bit with a little bit of sorrow in his face and said to me, we did, but I can't read. And I really thought about that, how that felt for him on his first day of school, which must have been a difficult day a long time ago since I first went to school. But some of my like I say, friends and my own son recently have gone through that. So there's a lot of stress involved, but that could have been countered by the teacher just explaining to the children that I'm giving you name badges because I need to learn your names. I don't expect you to be able to read everyone else's names. So even in a profession like teaching, it can be really easy for us to forget about that user and how it is perceived for them. And sometimes we can create great products. So I guess all of us have been using video calls a lot lately. And something that happened a few weeks ago, I was on a video call and I'd left myself on mute and I started talking, and then I just had a barrage of abuse. And sometimes that kind of user-centered element isn't just about achieving the task, but it's also about the behaviours that could drive. And there was nothing visible there for me to say that I was on mute, apart from, like say, a barrage of abuse from some of my colleagues. And that made me feel a bit bad, really. You know, I didn't feel great about that because it just felt like an opportunity for someone to have a go at me. So when we're building these products, we really need to sit in that seat of the user and understand exactly their context and exactly the things that they're going through. One other thing that kind of pops up is that you could have the best testwebsite.com in the world. It's got everything on it that you want. And I've done that not to call anyone out because there's quite a few companies out there that have got this problem. You can have everything there. It could do the job fantastically. But if you've got that not secure little element on there, automatically you lose that trust. And you put all that effort into building user-centered products, but then something derails it like that. So just a few things to be thinking of about how these things land and how these things actually make people feel. It's not just all about the fixing of a problem or the solving of a problem or answering a question, enabling a task. It's wider than that. So just a brief introduction to the kind of case study I'm going to talk about, the English Institute of Sport. I moved on there a few months ago, so just get out in the open. I don't work for them anymore, but I think sharing these stories, especially I was due to share these stories around this time because the Olympics was about to kick off. Obviously, that's been put back with everything that's been going on, but hopefully still resonate with people now and some of my thoughts and learnings from that. So the English Institute of Sport was created about 15 years ago, and their main focus is to improve sporting performance through science, medicine, and technology. And it always makes me laugh that those three are kind of in parallel. You wouldn't be able to tell, but science is around 200 people employed by the company, about 50 medicine, specialist doctors and people like that. And then there's a technology team of 6, and I kind of led the development side of that. So an interesting challenge when we're looking after 40 plus Olympic and Paralympic sports all across the country. So we had a number of different products. Started off as medical records product, and then we developed an athlete monitoring app, which I'm going to talk about a bit later on, where athletes could enter their information on a day-to-day basis, and then the practitioners, the coaching staff, physiotherapists, if they're coming back from injury, for example, could analyse that information and adjust the training sessions based upon that. So if giving the athlete a bit more of a voice than they perhaps used to have a few years ago. I did some really cool projects. So briefly there, we did some jet lag research with the Olympics being over in Japan and having that quite a long flight and the time difference and how that will affect the body. And also we did a lot of work around the menstrual cycle, and I got picked up by the BBC, and there's quite a lot of work done around that and transferred across to different non-Olympic sports. For example, netball got really involved in that, and so did the Women's Super League football. So yeah, we're working on some really kind of cool and interesting problems to try and solve. So I'm going to talk through a bit of a case study. I'm not going to mention any names of sports or athletes. So yeah, so basically I was asked as a product manager at the English Institute of Sport to go and attend a meeting where an athlete was struggling with something and he needed something doing to his app. We needed to make some amendments. And this is the kind of scene that I was expecting. I was expecting to have a cross-functional team, coaching staff, physiotherapists, nutritionists, psychologists, and hopefully the athlete themselves to try and delve into the problem. But if I'm honest, what really happened was this. It turned into a little bit of a fight. I was on my own, and the head coach greeted me quite coldly. Must have been in the room for about 2 minutes. He explained that this athlete was having, he was tired. That's the phrase he used. This athlete is suffering from tiredness, and we need to monitor that on the app. We have a competition in 6 weeks' time. We need data leading up to that. Away you go. And then he made his excuses and said he needed to make a cup of tea before he had a training session in 5 minutes' time. I'd driven from Manchester to Loughborough, and if anyone has ever done that trip before, you'll know it's not a nice journey, even at 6 a.m. in the morning. So I was a little bit annoyed. I tried to catch him and say, well, can I ask a few more questions? We need to really delve into that. You kind of given me a solution there. He wasn't interested, didn't entertain it, and off he went. So, given the constraints, a short period of time, luckily we developed the products in a way that we could adapt them quite quickly. And I took it back to the office, and we had a real difficult decision to make as a group. And I involved the whole group because that's just the way that we did things. We were inclusive. We needed to get those diverse opinions from different members of the team, and try and get that understanding, because everyone brings something different. That kind of divergent thinking is often underestimated, in my opinion. So we developed it, and we put the thing in exactly the thing that wanted, and we presented the data the week after. And we knew that this was going to happen. We knew that the solution was going to go in the bin, as the previous picture suggested. And the reaction was, well, we knew that already. And that then gave me a little bit of leeway to say, well, if you knew that already, then really we should have delved into that, into a different solution to try and understand what the problem was. So begrudgingly, we had a group ideation session, which was really good. And a few people quite evidently didn't want to be there. They were glued to their phones and looking at their laptops and not really paying that much attention. But we did manage to get through it. But my biggest concern was that we were hearing from stakeholders, essentially. We were hearing from the practitioners that I mentioned earlier. We weren't hearing from the athlete themselves. When we came down to a list there of tiredness, it's obviously something to do with sleep. Is it sleep quality, or could it be stress or nutrition, or the length of the sleeping? Could there be some undiagnosed illness that we've not identified? And one practitioner said, has he got a new partner? Has sexual activity got something to do with this? So I left that meeting none the wiser. We were going to have another session in the afternoon, and I asked a few times, can we just get the athlete in and understand exactly what that means to them? So one of the benefits of working at the English Institute of Sport was that I had free gym access. And this is the gym at Loughborough. And I was walking on the corridor where I took the photo from. And just out of shot, there's a load of bikes at the bottom corner. And I saw the athlete in question on the bikes. So I whipped on a pair of shorts and went into the gym and managed to get on the bike next to him. And he was cycling away, and it was quite embarrassing for me because I'm no athlete. But I made eye contact, and as he was coming to the close of his session, he took his earphones off, and that was my opportunity to try and speak to him. And I asked him about his tiredness, and then he showed me the app that we'd developed, which was quite cool, knowing that he was, he was quite attached to it, and that he found value in it, and that he enjoyed using the thing, and there was a lot of insight that from him. So we were ticking one box, and then I just asked one question, and I said, "What does tiredness mean to you? What do you mean by when you're tired?" And he started to talk about his shoulders, and that he was talking about his body feeling tired. And I would not make that connection without speaking to the athlete themselves. And of course, the penny dropped straight away. He was talking about fatigue. And we were still using the same language with him, because we're putting the question, what does tiredness, what is your tiredness? Can you record your tiredness on a daily basis? So we changed that question around that to muscle soreness. And we got slightly different results based upon that. And we did some more analysis and continue to do that. But muscle soreness, again, was a little bit too generic. So we just continued to iterate over and over again. And it ended up in creating a body chart where he could tap on a section of the body and show how sore that element was. And within a short period of time, we made the correlation that actually, as soon as the athlete is doing weight sessions, he's doing too many weight sessions, he's putting too much stress on his shoulders, and therefore he's becoming more and more tired. Now, the coaching staff weren't overly pleased that I'd had the conversation. It was a difficult conversation to have, to say, like, we don't really need this meeting because I've spoken to the athlete and this is what they've said. But I'll touch on some of those points in a few minutes' time. But what was lacking from all of us, from myself as a product manager, from the rest of my team who were developers, testers, etc., and from the practitioners involved, was they weren't thinking of the human element. We're designing for humans, and this person is a human first and an exceptional athlete second. And I think we have to be aware of that they're not just using our products on it, that they have a life outside our products. They have the same needs and wants as any other person. And it turns out the reason that the athlete was doing extra weights was to look good. And the reason he wanted to look good was because he had a photo shoot to model some sportswear, which was more lucrative than being an Olympic athlete. That was a really fascinating element that none of us had considered. So after that, what did we learn? And I've kind of combined a few things here from my time at the English Institute of Sport and about being user-centered and how having that focus on the user all the time and continuously learning helped shape the products that we produced. So I think the first thing to mention is that everyone's got an opinion, and sport is a thing that most people have got an opinion on, whether they're a spectator or they are a participant or they're a coach or a physiotherapist, whatever that is, everyone's got an opinion. They see things in a slightly different way, especially now we've got all these pundits and 24-hour sports news culture and podcasts all over the place and radio shows. Sport is a big thing, and it's the same within sport as well. So as you saw with those 6 different options, I think everyone's kind of making assumptions and doing that even within a sport and not just on the sidelines as a spectator. So as a product manager, as a BA, whether the job title, you've got to take that into consideration. And for me, it's about understanding those opinions and listening to those opinions, listening more than you speak, and combining that, and then trying to come to a consensus. And understanding exactly why those things are, what are the motivations. So if you've got a journey map of a process when you're building a website or whatever kind of product or service, always try and extend it a little bit further, because that way you can then really delve into that and understand the motivations, and it's not just starting at the start. Before someone gets to the start line, they've got to do a warm-up, they've got to eat the right food. All those things kind of get forgotten about sometimes. So that feeds into this, really, just understanding the context of all parties and the motivations and and how accurate that actually is, and validating that, and asking more questions, and having difficult conversations, and just being really like kind of leading with curiosity is something that I found very, very useful, because if you frame it in that way, people are more likely to be open with you rather than, oh, why'd you do that? Or, you know, the critical way of looking at things. If you start with curiosity, you can often find that that does reap the rewards. I mentioned the jet lag project that we were working on, and this was a paper prototype that we used there. So just using different approaches to different problems. We sent an athlete away for a week who was doing a recce over in Japan, and we gave them literally handwritten, circle how you're feeling on a scale of 1 to 5, and it came back in a bit of a state, to be perfectly honest, and there was red pen all over it, and there was days that weren't filled in, and it was a bit of a mess, really. But it made us think about things in a completely different way. We were able to learn a lot, and then before we even built that into the app, which obviously doing any kind of development costs money, this cost probably about £5 and a couple of hours of my work to try and get the right approach and to write this out and to get it over to the athlete and to explain the scenario of, this is what we're trying to do, we want to try and learn from you. So using different approaches for different problems was really beneficial to us as a team. Say this in jest, really, but the previous case study talking about getting to your users. I mean, the last thing I wanted to do was get on a bike next to an Olympian. It felt embarrassing for me, but I knew that was my opportunity. So do whatever it is that you can. Obviously, it's not going to be a normal scenario when you're doing that, but get out there, get out of the building, speak to people, team up with your researchers. If you haven't got researchers or UX designers or people like that who are doing that, then try and take that on yourself. And I know that time is obviously a big thing. Try and reach out to those people who are using and interacting with your products and services on a day-to-day basis. Get a real understanding of their thinking and take that kind of user-centered approach. Tricky one in current circumstances, but get everyone together is probably one of the biggest learnings of my career. Is we bring everyone together at the same point, and that doesn't have to be in person. But you need a good facilitator, and you need to be able to understand exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve. So yeah, getting everyone together. This is a photo of the GB boxing squad who were in Kazakhstan a year or so ago, and it's a hotel. Most of them had been training, and there was supposed to be a room booked, a big room where everyone could sit down comfortably and talk about this at team meeting, because it was very rare that all the coaches and all the athletes were in the same building at the same time. That didn't happen. So one of the leaders in the middle of the picture there said, right, we're having this conversation anyway. So we did it outside on a corridor in the hotel, which, as you can see, the people sat on the floor, the athletes are absolutely shattered and don't want to be there, but they're making the most of that opportunity to speak to people, to understand exactly what's going on and have those transparent conversations. Another key one, especially working in sport, was I used the word agile to a gymnastics coach, and that obviously took a completely different meaning to them than it did to me. So just being clear and thinking about, again, your user. Even if you're having a conversation, the other person can be viewed as your user. Adjusting language is a key thing for me to make sure that you are clear and asking questions, or asking open-ended questions, to make sure that people have understood what you're trying to get across. As I mentioned earlier, not everyone's going to agree all the time, and I feel like that's part of my job, is to ultimately be the decision maker. Having listened to all the different opinions and different points of view, the key thing is that I make a decision and I stand by that. And it's not a decision that's made from assumptions. It's a decision that is made from listening to people. Sometimes you might have to ignore or disregard something that a stakeholder has said, even if they are a key stakeholder, because the research suggests overwhelmingly that that isn't the problem, or that isn't the solution at this time. And going back to people and having those conversations, again, encouraging that transparency is a key element of what I do as a product manager. And it can be difficult at times. Another one there is that, it just doesn't go to plan all the time. I heard someone say that to fail was to first attempt at kind of learning, and I understand that. I think that is a good way of kind of framing it, and that not being afraid of failure, listening to people, doing the things that you believe are true, but then iterating your approach if you need to. I don't think anything's ever done anymore. I think it's, especially in an agile world, there is always an opportunity to make an iteration and to change things and to adapt plans. But just accepting that and being aware that things don't go the way that you want all the time, and that is a key element for me. You need to be aware of those kind of things. Creating that safety amongst the team and the people that you're speaking to, not asking leading questions and doing your research just to validate assumptions. You're doing that to learn in a way that can help shape your products and services. And finally, the key thing to remember, whatever it is that you're doing, whatever job that you're doing, whatever kind of product you're working on, 99 times out of 100, then you are designing for humans, and you need to consider how that's going to land with a human. Sit in their seat, go through those things, and make sure that the experience that you are providing to people is one that meets their expectations and also is as effortless and efficient and effective as possible. Thanks for listening.
Fantastic, excellent. Well, thanks, Chris. I was well, there's so much, so many questions that are springing to my mind about what you've just mentioned, and in fact, now would be a good time for us to switch over to the Jamboard and see what people have been asking. This is always a slightly terrifying thing for me to do because I've not been paying too much attention to it, but normally there's some interesting things on there. So, oh wow, there's loads. Let's have a look. Okay, so wow, there's lots of ideas on there. I have the real urge to put these into themes. I can see some themes emerging there, but it's interesting, isn't it? Like you've got the iterate. You talked about journey maps, achieving tasks. The whole we're designing for humans, that really hasn't resonated with me. And actually, I see someone's put don't ask leading questions there, which is really interesting because one thing I recognized, or I recognize in myself as a BA, is that like if you're interviewing lots of people, it's really easy to go into like the third or fourth interview assuming that you already know the answer because you've spoken to 3 or 4 people already. So falling into those sorts of traps. So fantastic, excellent. Well, if you're tuned in live, keep adding to that Jamboard, and I will send a link out afterwards to everyone that registered, so you can take a look. So let's talk about some of the topics that you covered then, Chris. So we have a few questions coming in. So the first question is from Nefra, and Nefra asks, really understanding someone else's viewpoint is very hard as we tend to unconsciously look through our own lens of experience and temperament. That's a really good point. What tips have you got for getting past our own unconscious assumptions? It's that old thing, I guess, about it's really hard to be objective, and arguably no one is objective because we're all looking through a lens.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a difficult one. It's a good question, that, Nefra. Thanks for that. For me, it's about, it's okay to have assumptions. It's just being aware of that for me. And I find prototyping is a good way of doing that with a person to go through that and to ask those questions and be okay with being wrong. That's the key bit for me, is you assuming things is fine and it's natural. A lot of it's about understanding exactly what you are trying to get out of the person. If you're going to a conversation to validate your assumption, then you're in the wrong ballpark, really. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, you should be going there to learn and to really understand. If your assumption is correct, then that's great. But if it's not, you still learn, and you're still going to provide a better solution to that. So the first step really is the awareness that potentially you are bringing a lot of bias to that. And the other thing I find is that when you're asking these questions, and someone will give you an answer, if you're quiet for long enough, they'll probably keep talking. Or if you say, oh, "Tell me more," or "Go on," just small, a few small words, you can get a lot more insight out of people, because they have that freedom that you can show that you're listening to what they're trying to say, and that you are really interested in solving the problem and understanding the problem first and foremost.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Chris, because I know one thing that, like, quite early in my career, one thing I always felt nervous about was like showing any gap in my knowledge, like any vulnerability. I'm like, you can't show any vulnerability because, people might find out that, I don't know about but I know I and a lot of other BAs I know have quite a lot of imposter syndrome. It's like, we're not real BA. Someone will find us out that we don't know every single bit of UML, and of course it's nonsense, right? But I used to sort of think, well, I can't ask questions like what they mean by a particular term, because they might think I'm stupid. Whereas I actually find, like, genuinely one of the questions I find myself asking most often is, admittedly, this is often in a financial services environment, is, when you say customer, what do you mean by customer? Because a seemingly simple term like that means very different things depending on who you ask. So that, and I really liked in your presentation, you were talking about curiosity, and if we have that open curiosity, I think people like talking about what they do, don't they? So if we present curiously, then they're going to respond really well.
Yeah, I think also adding a bit of humour sometimes. I remember I was doing some work with Skeleton down in Bath, and I didn't really watch that sport, and I didn't know what the thing was called. It looks like an upside down tea tray that they jump on, and I was kind of thinking, oh, I need to ask this now, because I was there at the facility, and they were going down a little ramp, and I just had to say, oh, you're going to think I'm I've got no idea about sports at all, but what's that actually called? Is it? And then luckily the coach was kind of laughing, saying, "Oh yeah, don't worry, it's a common problem." Just being open to that, open to being wrong. That I didn't know what a sled was, or that's what I might guess that was it, but I didn't know that. And instead of making myself even more foolish, I just asked the question outright. And people can react to that in the right ways, hopefully. Especially, like I say, inject a little bit of humour to it, make it lighthearted, and start with that curiosity.
Yeah, I think a little bit of humour goes a long way, doesn't it, in change. So, okay, so our next question comes from Hertja, and Hertja says, "Hi, great talk. Sometimes managers can be difficult if you want to talk to the user, like with you talking to the athlete. Any tips on how to convince managers that it's both useful and essential to talk to the actual users?" This is a really interesting one, and actually I'll springboard from what Hertja says there, in that, like, sometimes it's like even more complex if there's an outsourcing relationship, when perhaps someone's developing a solution for a client, and they're like even further removed from the end customer. So any tips in either of those circumstances for actually getting access to the customer when there's a middle manager trying to stop you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. For me, it's about storytelling. I think is a key element of it. Is to look at if you've got data available, if you see there's a particular drop off at a certain point, ask questions of the manager to say, "Oh, have you noticed this? And what do you think about that?" And sometimes I'll try and frame it in quite a mischievous way, and make sure that they're not going to be giving you a full warts and all answer, and that they can start getting curious. I think, looking at data, but then also looking at data in any different way. It doesn't have to be Google Analytics data or any kind of analytics data. It can be a review on a website. It can be someone complaining on a message board. It can be a number of those different things, and highlighting that to a middle manager and say, I want to go and do that. And I think it was in in a book I read recently around saying that that's your intention. I intend to do this,
Yeah,
rather than asking permission to go and do research. I
yeah,
have noticed this. I intend to go and do that, and frame it in that way and see what the response is.
yeah. I forget the name of the author, but one of the books was Turn the Ship Around.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
If anyone has Google near them and they can remember the author's name, if you could pop that in the Q&A, because it's a very good book. And he wrote, I think he wrote another book called The Language of Leadership or something, where he talks specifically about that. Thank you, Richard says David Marquette. Of course, it was David.
That's yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and both very good books if you're listening and haven't read them, and it is interesting, isn't it? In fact, I was speaking to someone else recently who was saying that the words we use and the words we use can actually affect the responses we get. And so they were saying, for example, that rather than constantly apologizing for everything, which, well, as British people we tend to do anyway, and I think as business analysts we do a lot, like rather than saying sorry for the delay in replying, maybe sometimes it's best to say thanks for your patience, type of thing. So it's an interesting thing. And Richard's just added that it's intent-based leadership. So very, very interesting stuff to look up. So excellent. Okay, so our next question comes from Charlie. And Charlie says, having been a BA and product manager in this interesting sector, what could others learn from sport? Wow, that's a big question.
It's a big question. I don't want to give the obvious answer if there's such a thing. It's we did some work with British Cycling a while ago around the kind of marginal gains, the optimization and things like that. I think that's a key element of it, and just looking at things that you think are doing well and trying to make them work even better is a key element to sporting success, especially when you look at the fine margins between a gold medal and a fourth place finish, even on the podium. I think some of the things that we were working on, really trying to encourage that collaboration. So I mentioned the medical record system that we created, and that was all fine. It's a lot of scandal around the medical records keeping of some of the GB sports quite a while ago now, and that was the main reason for us doing that as a central body to create that and make it as secure as possible and all those standard elements. But then afterwards, it's about collaborating. So a cyclist may have an injury, and then a triathlete might have an injury that's very, very similar, and enabling that collaboration of two things that are in different areas, tying those two people up to say, oh, you've experienced this or you've experienced this, shall we have a chat? Rather than them both going down different paths. And if it's the same type of injury, the cycling physiotherapist might have tried A, B, and C and realised that when it got to D, that was the thing to try. So they can tell the triathlete practitioner that actually start with D, potentially. So there's that kind of bringing in as much collaboration as you can, which is difficult in a competitive world if you're creating products for for commercial entities. I guess that is quite a difficult thing. But yeah, being open to that and really kind of tapping into the shared knowledge of maybe even your network.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were talking there, I'm in a very, very different context, but I was thinking about situations I've worked where well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we talk about an organization like it's this unified thing where everyone, where like it's an organism that functions well, and most organizations are pretty dysfunctional, if we're honest, or have elements of dysfunction. And I was thinking about that sharing of well, not necessarily. I mean, if it's an athlete and it's an injury, but actually you've got patterns like that in organizations where, okay, it might not be a physical injury, but a problem has occurred, and if we really understand why that problem has occurred, there's probably 10 other problems waiting in the pipeline that we can take some preventative action for, type of thing. And and it's that sort of like stopping the firefighting doom loop where everything is important and urgent, so no preventative stuff ever gets done. So sort of maybe sort of killing that doom loop type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing that's just come to mind is that Sir Dave Brailsford does very well is the fact if you do find a problem, then you don't hide it. You admit it, you talk about it, and you share that to as many people who listen in that organisation to ensure that they've got that knowledge that they don't make the same mistake. So if you're working in a big organisation that has different teams doing different things, just making that stuff visible, whether it's via a blog or a video post in this day, or bring it up in a team meeting or whatnot when we're back in person.
That's really interesting, actually, Chris, and that brings me to another book I listened to the audio version of, which was Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed. Have you come across that one, Chris?
I have, yeah. I've not finished it yet. That's I'm probably about halfway through that. Actually.
Oh, it's a really good book. I thought it was divided. People I've spoken to either love it or hate it. For what it's worth, I loved it, and it talks about how aviation is very safe because you've got the black box in the voice and data recorder in an aeroplane. So if a tragedy happens, there can actually be some proper analysis done. But there are elements of aviation in modern times where actually pilots are encouraged to be, like no one's going to get, if you make a mistake, you're not going to get fired for it, providing that the organisation can learn from it. And in some cases, the airlines will learn from it and will update their emergency checklists or whatever. So interesting. Okay, so our next comment is from Richard, and Richard says, very interesting and thought-provoking presentation, which I wholeheartedly agree with. One technique which Chris touched upon, which can be useful when dealing with situations where there are weak or hidden signals, is the use of micro-narratives from Dave Snowden. And I suspect many of us will know Dave Snowden from his work on Cynefin and other things. And Richard says, so for example, tell me a story about feeling tired. So that's an interesting way of approaching it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we could have used that with the coaching staff. But I think that the big problem there was with it was almost a lack of respect, if I'm perfectly honest, in that they didn't really understand our world and what we needed to do and how we could do that. We were providing a service to them, and that was that. But yeah, it's really, I've never actually used that myself, but it's definitely an effective way of communicating, I think.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as human beings, we do tend to process things in stories, don't we? We talk about things having a beginning, a middle, and an end, and everything has a sort of inbuilt narrative. So I definitely need to look into more about that micro narratives. That sounds very interesting. So Richard also adds that this can be extended using his sense-making tools. That's Dave Snowden's sense-making tool, where you ask them to add some qualitative data about this story, which allows you to plot the story in a story landscape. So wow, that sounds like a very very interesting tool. So excellent. Okay, so one question I had, which is, we've talked about customers, we've talked about users, we've talked about we sort of like the stakeholders, and out there in the world, people talk about customer experience, they talk about user experience, and there are sort of disciplines around both of those things. I mean, what would you say, in your opinion, is the difference between like user experience and customer experience, or does it even matter?
No, I think the two do merge together, but I feel like the customer experience is the wide thing, and then the user experience is a part of that, where they're interacting with that. It's more of an end-to-end thing. So most products and services don't start with someone landing at the website. They actually start with a Google search, for example. And if they find that straight away and they seamlessly go to the thing that they want, and they're landing on the page that they want, there's an easy information architecture, and they can then go and do the task that they're looking for, that's going to lead to a very good customer experience. But sometimes if you think about it, with trains are a good example, where you might not have the greatest experience buying the ticket, finding the platform, or those kind of elements, you just want to make the journey. But there are things and steps you have to do before you get on that train, and things and steps you have to do once you get out of the station. You still need your ticket in most stations now to pass out. Those changes have happened over the years, and I think sometimes that's still quite alien to someone. I know some of the my older family were like, oh, I've thrown the ticket away now because they don't travel very often on trains, and that's part of the customer experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one thing that I've thought, and that's a really interesting example, is that often the boundary, and I think you said in your presentation about like something around about expanding the journeys, and that's something that really resonated with me when you said it, because I see a lot of organizations talking about their digital journeys, right? And it makes sense, right? Because you can plot a nice digital journey from from inquiry through to fulfillment or whatever, right? But if you're a hotel and you've got the best journey in booking, but when you turn up, they can't find it because their internal system's rubbish and the room's not ready and the hotel isn't maintained, and the hotel isn't in a useful place, then it's then you're on a hiding to nothing type of thing. And I think you were talking about motivations, and that's one thing that I was thinking about. A while back when I had a very, very minor health complaint, and I went to my GP, and my GP did what GPs often do: send you off for a routine blood test. And all of these things are different entities, as far as like the blood testing clinic is over here, and there's a form you take which they know what to do and so on. And I was thinking, and that blood testing clinic is in a hospital. It's in a part, but even the hospital is really confusing as to which bit you're supposed to be in. And I was thinking, for very, very good reason, it's done that way, and we have fantastic practitioners and administrators in those hospitals, of course. But from a customer, I don't see the boundary. For me, it's just, I think I might be ill. I want to not be ill.
Yeah.
all of those internal bits are just ununderstandable to me.
Yeah, it's boiling that down, isn't it, to what is the key concern? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And what apprehension may you have? Where are the points of potential anxiety during that process? And it's making that as easy as possible from your perspective. And the hospital may be designed in a specific way to allow a certain process to thrive, rather than, and that's part of the design, is that they've made those decisions on purpose. But we have no understanding of that, do we, as patients?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think a lot of organizations, or certainly organizations I've worked in, a lot of processes often get built to be as efficient as possible for the organization, but as efficient, and I guess it's down to perspectives, isn't it? Because you need a balance. But actually, as efficient as possible for the organization is often really, really irritating, because that means, for example, you actually want a queue on the phone line because you want to be utilizing your people, type of thing. And so there's that balance between, something that's effective, efficient, it's delivering that efficacy type of thing. So
yeah, and I see a lot of that in roadmaps. Actually, I see a lot of that in different organizational roadmaps, in that they're only focusing on, we need to grow by X%, we need to increase this, but the user's not involved in that. The users aren't there. And for me, a good roadmap is something that takes into consideration, we're going to make X improvement for our users, as well as achieving our own business objectives as well. And it's really difficult to get that blend right, but there has to be a balance, and it's not just one or the other, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about tools and techniques, because you mentioned a couple. You mentioned journey maps and and so on. But if you were to think about a tool or a couple of tools that you think, these are really practical, these are things that people could take away, are you able to briefly describe or mention a couple that people should be looking up?
Yeah, I think most of them finish with the word map. I use user story maps a lot.
Yeah.
Jeff Patton's book, and I must have read that a dozen times over the last 10 years. Fantastic book, a great technique to really get into, and you can get people involved as well. And I think that's the key bit for me is to involve people. It's not something that you sit away at your desk all day doing. You don't create a map that way. It's an interactive process. And a lot of the online whiteboard tools are now, there's templates in there that allow you to do that. There's guidance to go through those things. So the sun's come out in Manchester, which is I've seen that for a little while.
It's summer.
Yeah. We'd have thought that in the middle of July. But anyway, yeah, sorry, I digress. I think, and journey mapping I did mention that a couple of times, but that is my go-to tool. That's the first one to cover a lot of the things we've already spoken around. Where do these people come from? How do they find us? Are they already aware of us? Are we a brand that they're familiar with? Do we need to advertise more for when they need these services or products? And journey mapping, I'll just reiterate this, not just the product that you're using, not the product that you're understanding the motivations and also having a good ending as well. So if someone doesn't want to use your products and service anymore, treating those people with respect and doing things in the right way, not giving them 16 emails to say, confirm unsubscription, confirm the direct debit stopped, confirm whatever those things are. Yeah. Bundling those things into a nice way, because I think you're always leaving the door slightly open for them to say, well, actually, I'm going back to that customer experience thing again. I'm leaving with a nice feeling of that product served me well, or maybe I haven't used it enough, but then I'm dealt with in a human way, that things are thought about and designed in a good way.
Yeah. So sort of that empathy and understanding how the customer actually wants to be treated. So good. So we'll take one final question. We've probably got time for one final question. So Tim says, great presentation, thank you, and a really interesting discussion. You mentioned that these days we're never done, always room for improvement. So what are the factors for deciding when to stop? And he puts in brackets time, money, sponsors, patience, etc. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on the stage that you're at. So if it's an MVP and a minimal viable product, then when it's good enough, or when you've got enough to learn, and you can continue to iterate from that. But then at the other end of the kind of the life cycle, you've got to consider when things need to retire. And I think that is something that companies don't pay much attention to, because it's just part of their estate. It's another product that they don't really understand how much cost that takes to upkeep, whether that's financially, whether that's people and energy and all that kind of thing. So it's a very difficult balancing act, especially when it comes to UX as well. I mean, you could continue shining forever, trying to get that polish in there. But it's about for me, when you're comfortable that the data and the research, the quant and qual both suggest that the product or service is doing what the user is expecting. It's meeting those expectations, and that's what I deem to be good enough in a live product or service.
Yeah, and then I suppose the challenge then is to monitor it in case those expectations change, or if the user needs change, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. In the world we live in now, that you have to make these changes and just be aware of them. And I think, again, as a product manager, you have to understand that. A BA as well, like I've said a few times about job titles and what, really differentiating between the two. It's about having that awareness and understanding your product and your offering to a degree, but more focusing on the people that you're serving.
Yeah. Definitely. So, in like a minute or less, I'll put you on the spot, Chris. If there was a biggest takeaway that you think, yeah, this is the thing I really want people to take away from this session, what would that biggest takeaway be?
Understand your user. Understand the problem, try and solve those problems, and we do that by understanding humans. And that's the key bit. It's about, you can do everything else, but there's no point creating something that's not going to be used. So spend the time, spend the energy that you've got to go through those things. Make sure that you are doing the right thing. Solve those real problems, and you can only do that by understanding what those real problems are, and you can only do that by speaking to people who are the people who are going to use those products and services on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So get that primary insight. Get the primary insight, the real stuff. So, Chris, fantastic. We could talk about this for hours. It's a fascinating topic, but we're just about up against time. Now, I am certain, Chris, that people will want to stay in touch with you. They'll want to follow what you're up to. What's the best way for people to contact you? Is it sort of LinkedIn or what?
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn. I'm not particularly active on there, if I'm perfectly honest. But I'm quite a big user of Twitter. I'm not that vocal on it, but I do post on there occasionally. The handle is Badly Drawn Burns. Keep in touch that way. If anyone's got any other questions that we didn't get to today, or got any interest in that, then do feel free to contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn.
Fantastic. So what I'll do on the email that goes out after, I'll pop your LinkedIn and Twitter details so people can, connect with you that way and stay in touch. So
great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Really, really fascinating topic. A lot to think about. And I'm just looking at the Jamboard, which is still growing. So I'll post a link to that in the wrap-up email as well. And a massive thank you to everyone who tuned in live, or indeed everyone who's watching the recording. So a bit of a reminder about what these BA community webinars are about. Really, they were designed with the idea of discussing topics that are not necessarily core to business analysis, but are topics that are maybe from different disciplines, or things that we maybe should be discussing and don't discuss as often as we should. And after the session, you'll get a quick email, and there'll be a link to the recording. There'll also be a link to a quick survey. And there's only about 3 questions. I'd be really grateful if you could fill that in. One of the questions is, what topics do you want to hear about? And literally every one of those comments that you put in does get read. So please put them in, if and I'll try and make it happen. If you have a topic that you want to talk about, that's even better. So please do get in touch. In fact, Chris, we hadn't sort of connected before, and you got in touch, and we got chatting, and then it was like, yeah, great, let's do a webinar. So that was a sort of example of that sort of serendipitous online communication, and it really worked out fantastically. So if anyone's watching this thinking, I really wish I could do a presentation on and sometimes people ask me, well, do you have to be a professional speaker to speak on a webinar? And I don't really know what a professional speaker is, but we're practitioners, so I think any insight is absolutely fine. So do get in touch. We've also got 4 upcoming webinars over the next few weeks. Again, they'll be in that email. There's a BA open mic night. We're doing a webinar on bouncing back from redundancy. If any of you tuned in are unfortunate enough to be in that situation, we've got a panel. We've got one on BAE development and starting up a book club, and there's one on building relationships in virtual environments, which is probably very, very relevant for a number of us right now. So do keep an eye out for those. But until then, have a fantastic evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks again, Chris. Really enjoyed it, and hope to catch up with you all soon. Cheers.
Thanks very much.